Hello, my name is Frank, and I will be covering two different articles that cover the anterior cingulate cortex and its role in socializing. The two articles I will be covering are the anterior cingulate cortex signals attention in a social paradigm that manipulates reward and shock by Schneider et al. 2020, and social risk coding by the amygdala activity and connectivity with the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex by Kim et al. 2025. Alright, on to the first one. The anterior cingulate cortex signals attention in a social paradigm that manipulates reward and shock by Schneider et al. 2020. Purpose of the study. In the first study, the researchers wanted to understand what the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, is actually signaling during social situations involving both reward and threat. Previous studies had shown that reward or shock delivered to another of the same species have similar modulations of the neurons in the ACC as experiencing the shock/rewards firsthand. However, there has been no study that has done both rewards and shock at the same time. This confound leaves the results of these previous studies to interpretation as to whether they had really shown empathy. It could be that what they had shown was the attention being paid to the outcomes of the stimuli, or it could be the valence/emotion of these stimuli. To figure out how the ACC responds in social contexts, the researchers used a Pavlovian social outcome task. In this task, two rats are placed on opposite ends of a divider. The divider is a mesh that allows the rats to see, smell, and hear each other. On both ends, the floors have a grid of conductive rods for delivering a shock, and a directional light and a food cup. Both sides are mirror images of the other. One of the rats has its AEC being recorded by implanting electrodes into its skull, or into its brain, specifically the AEC. If two rats were ever paired together, they were always stuck with each other for the entirety of the whole experiment. The way the task would work is a house light would turn on between both the rats, and then 5 seconds later a speaker would play an outcome cue that would indicate one of three possible outcomes. Either a reward would be given, a shock would be given, or nothing would happen. After 5 seconds, post outcome cue noise, a directional light would turn on for 10 seconds, indicating which of the two rats would receive the outcome. About 5 seconds in of the directional light turning on, one of the outcomes would happen, followed by about another 5 seconds, and then everything just turns off. 6 different pairs of rats were used for this experiment. Each pair got 4 separate trial blocks, with each trial block getting 6 trial outcomes. Each outcome got about 10 trials each, so totaling about 60 trials per trial block. The 6 trial outcomes were reward self. Self is in the rat being recorded. Reward other is in the rat, other being the rat that's not being recorded. Neutral self, neutral other, shock self, shock other. The 4 trial blocks were divided up by which rat was being reinforced or not. By reinforced, I mean actually receiving the reward/shock. The 4 trial blocks were both being reinforced, the recording rat being reinforced, but the non-recording rat not being enforced, the recording rat not being reinforced, and the other rat being reinforced, and then no rat being reinforced at all. The results. The rats learned the cue meanings pretty quickly. The behavior reflected the type of outcome that was being predicted. So they approached their food cups for the food cue, and they froze for shock cues. Both these behaviors occurred even if the directional light was signaled for the other rat. We know this was a social thing, though, as if it was a shock cue, the rat would go to the mesh to sort of kind of check up on the other rat. Interestingly, though, if the other rat was being shocked, but the non-shocked rat wasn't being reinforced that turn, they weren't as likely to freeze at all, sort of implying that they knew that they themselves were safe, and they were almost less empathetic, you could say, if they themselves weren't going to be shocked. ACC neurons showed increased firing when both reward and shock occurred to the recording rat. The reward did have a bigger firing rate than the shock when done to the recording rat. When the shock was done to the other rat, the recording rat's ACC response depended entirely on if the recording rat was at risk of being shocked. So if it was being reinforced, then it would give this response. If it wasn't, there was basically no significant response from the ACC. These findings suggest that the activity of the ACC in rats is more likely related to the attention being paid to the stimulus than the emotion/valence that the stimuli has. This is shown by the biggest increase in firing being from the ACC when the reward is personally given to the rat because it's paying the most attention to it. It would be the stimuli that it would be given to it that would be the most attention grabbing. It is also shown by the rat's ACC not firing when the other rat is shocked, and it knows there's no risk to itself, as why bother paying attention. Both of these examples show how the ACC is related more to the attention being paid to the stimuli than the emotional or the valence of the stimuli itself by amygdala activity and connectivity with the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex by Kim et al. 2025. The purpose of the study, the second study investigated the neural activity of humans when evaluating social risk derived from uncertainty of personal compliments received from social partners. They're specifically trying to look at the amygdala and its connection to the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the DACC. Some of the main things they're going to be looking at is does the amygdala encode social variance risk the same way it encodes non-social risk, and does its connectivity to the DACC reflect whether somebody is socially risk adverse or risk seeking or not. To do this, the study did a behavioral economics thing to figure out the value of certain stimuli, as well as a multimodal reward paradigm and the fMRI during a structured decision-making task to find out the neural side of what's all going on. They had 24 volunteers initially. The final sample was 20 after some exclusions, with about 11 being female. The full exclusion criteria basically was just normal vision, typical diet, and no psychiatric, neurological disorders, as well as no left-handed people, as that their brains are all different and funky and all that sort of stuff. To find the value of the social rewards, they did an independent auction task held on the first day. The specific name of the task is the Becker-DeGroot-Marshak. It's BDM. It's a BDM auction task. Is what the BDM auction task does is it measures the subjective value and risk attitude for both social and non-social rewards by finding the participants' willingness to pay. The social rewards used were photos of human faces with positive or neutral expressions. It's about the upper half of their body. And it was paired with a compliment like good job or I think you are terrific. Each face plus compliment was used only once to try and maintain novelty. The non-social rewards used consisted of about 3 commercially available smoothies. As well, they varied in the amount of smoothie. I think it was 15 to 330 milligrams. Participants were asked not to drink for 3 hours before the experiment to make the smoothies a little bit more worth their while. At the start of each reward task, participants were given $1. Participants had to bid between 0 and 100 pennies on each reward. They are shown 3 possible rewards at a time for about 3 seconds. 2 of the options were low risk, 1 was high risk. The risk was shown by being 2 red bars on a scale, and then they had another scale on the other side for betting. But between the 2 red bars was the risk. The bigger the distance between the 2 bars, the higher the risk. The value of the reward was randomly generated, and as well as the risk was randomly generated. And then between that risk, there was randomly between that, a number would be picked by the computer. And if they outbid that computer, the random number the computer had bid, they would get the reward, and they'd have to pay the money. But this only happened for one of the rewards out of the 48 trials they did. And then they also, if they didn't, and they underbid on that random trial, they would still keep their money, but they wouldn't get their... They did this 3 separate times, once for social reward evaluation, one for the juice reward evaluation, and one was a risky option evaluation, which was both social and non-social. Then at the end of this, then after doing the BDM auction task, they then had to practice the next day's task. That way they could be familiar with it before they had to enter the fMRI. Following up the BDM task, on the second day, they had to do a fMRI risky choice task. They did this about 3 times with 18 trials each, about 18 minutes per one of the trials. Each trial began with an information screen specifying the type of reward, either a juice or social reward, and the required action, which was either a eye movement or a hand movement, and they are then shown a low-risk option and a high-risk option. The order of which the level of risk is shown is random, and the options vary in 4 levels of risk, with the first 1 to 2 being low and the second 2 being high, as well as they had varying expected values, which was the middle ground in which the risk was based off of. They then had to indicate which of the 2 options they wanted by performing the specified action previously, which was either the eye or the hand or the eye movement, in the prompted direction. The direction of their action is prompted by the numbers 1 or 2 being related to the order of which the 2 options they were shown. And the numbers are on either side of a fixation point that was shown previously for about 4 seconds. Incorrect responses, so like if you do a hand movement for an eye movement, just triggers a repetition of the trial that was just completed. The results. About 75% of the participants were socially risk adverse, while only 55% were non socially risk adverse, and the average between the two was about 60% risk adverse. In the fMRI data, activity in the bilateral amygdala increased in the fMRI data, activity in the bilateral amygdala, meaning like both sides of it, like both sides of the brain's amygdalas, increased parametrically, meaning like it's controlled by like a third parameter, which increased the variance risk both when participants evaluated social rewards and when they evaluated non-social juice rewards. So the level of risk was the third parameter, and the other parameters were either social or non-social. These findings point towards the amygdala being not just a fear center, and that it actually calculates risk, both social and non-social risk. They also found that the willing to pay signals were mainly in the right amygdala. This suggests that the amygdala controls not only the encoding uncertain risk, but also subjective value, indicating a dual role in evaluation and uncertainty, but more specifically in the right amygdala, not the left one. Using a psychophysiological interaction, a PPI analysis, the authors used the right amygdala as a seed region, basically just to figure out where the connectivity, like a starting point for where all the connectivity is measured from. And by using the right amygdala as a seed region, they looked at how its connectivity changed depending on social risk. They found that people who were more socially risk adverse through the bidding task showed a stronger negative coupling between the amygdala and the DACCA, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, during social risk decision making. That is, that the more someone disliked social risk, the more their amygdala and their DACC become decoupled or inversely coupled when facing risky social options. A similar negative coupling effect was found between the amygdala and the temporal parietal junction, TPJ, a brain area often implicated in social cognition as a function of social risk attitude. Importantly, these connective relations were specific to social risk, and they did not appear for non-social risk. Thus, the amygdala tracked variance risk in both domains, but kept them neurally distinct. Both studies examine how the brain processes social information, especially involving uncertainty or threat, but they approach the problem from two different angles. Now, they both involve the anterior cingulate cortex in a social context, but the first article just tracks its activity, while the second one tracks its connectivity to the amygdala. They both also examine how the brain handles social uncertainty/threat. In the first article, this is a shock to the partner, and in the second article, it is the risk of getting the social reward or not. They also have some differences among the two articles. The first one uses rats, and it's a single unit electrophysiology, and the second one uses humans with an fMRI to check the neural component. They both covered similar neural regions and a similar topic, but they seek different answers. In the first article, they seek to understand the AAC and how it primarily tracks attention/arousal and/or valence. And in the second article, they took a more wide approach and tracked how the amygdala tracks variance risk and how its connectivity to the DACC predicts social risk preference. So I'm not sure if I have to do discussion questions or not. I'm still going to do them because I got to bat out the runtime a little. But yeah. So the first question is, does the rat's ACC firing only when it's at risk mean the rat lacks empathy? So where I'm trying to go with this is that the rat doesn't really seem to have as much of a reaction to the circumstances the other rat is having unless it itself is at risk of befalling those same circumstances. And does that kind of imply that the rat lacks empathy? Now, I asked specifically about the ACC, but the behavior also follows the same pattern of the ACC of being less freezing if the rat's not at risk, even if it knows the other rat's going to get the shock. And I guess it's more of a philosophy question, but I don't feel, or a philosophical question, I should say. I don't think it means it lacks empathy. I think it more just points towards that the ACC is less involved in neurological. I guess how would you go about defining empathy? Maybe you could say that the rat, if would it be willing to sort of, I guess, offer condolences, but they didn't really check anything like that. So I don't think that a lack of reduction or a less firing in the ACC points to less empathy in the rat, and more likely it points to just that the rat is, well, as they found, it's the salience. It's like how much attention are they paying to the stimuli. It doesn't really show a lack of empathy, but more of a lack of attention than anything. And the second part of that question is just purely to provoke people into debate. That's all it is. It's just a provocation. The second question: Are there two different approaches? Are the two different approaches in measuring socialness equally valid, or is one better? I'm personally more inclined to the first study's version of how they measured like socialness, which was the shock and the food, and then how the rats interacted, and if they froze when the other rat was freezing, and of course the neural component. I think the neural component was better in the second study for sure, but the first study had a better behavioral test for socializability, as I don't think that a photo with a compliment is a very good stand-in for socialization or socializing or however you want to describe the word socialness. So my second question is the social risk being tracked in the second study similar to a social fear? I know that the amygdala is the fear center of the brain, and so I'm kind of wondering, was it social risk that they measured or social fear? You could also turn the argument around and say that the amygdala is more of a risk evaluator than a fear evaluator. As really, like, what is fear? Is fear just the evaluation of risk? I'm scared of heights not because they're tall, but because there's the risk of falling. Is the amygdala, is fear not really even fear, but just risk? Being unwilling to engage in risk, is that fear? I know that's not really an answer to my own question. It's just something I was thinking about, and if this was actually during the class, I assume other people would have maybe a better idea as to what the true answer really is. But it's an interesting question, so I put it in there. That's all I have for now. Thank you for watching. This was a final assignment for a class, a neuroscience class. I had to make this presentation. I figured I'd just throw it up on my YouTube channel, so I'm going to do that. We'll see what becomes of it. It was a lot of fun looking into this. The class was fun. I enjoyed it. You probably won't see anything else like this on the. Well, you might. You never know. We'll see how it plays out. But yeah, thanks for watching.